everyone. Welcome to the first session of Tactographics using Inkscape. My name is Julie Sumwalt. I'm the Braille specialist at the Wisconsin Center for the Blind and Visually Impaired. My background is that of a transcriber. In my work, I often need to make tactographics, which are raised line drawings. There are several methods for making tactographics, or TGs for short. I'll try to always say tactographics, but if I let TG slip, then you know what I mean. Collage is one way to make tactographics, using physical bits and pieces to make physical tactographics directly. In textbooks, a plastic sheet is laid over the original tactographic, and both are put into an oven to make a plastic mold of the original tactographic. This method makes tactographics with lots of different heights and textures. It also requires a constant supply of bits and pieces to put together and a physical space to store the original tactographic. It can take a lot of time to make a collage tactographic. Another common way to make tactographics is to use software and Braille embossers. This method is quick, but it has almost no height differential. It's digital, so it doesn't require shelf space or a supply of bits and pieces, and it uses regular Braille paper, but embossers cannot produce precise tactographics. So I like to make tactographics on microcapsule paper using software to do the drawing. This, to me, is a happy medium between the collage and embosser produced tactographics. It's a digital way to do the drawing, so there's no physical space used, and the drawings can be reused. There's more height differential than embosser tactographics, but not as much as collage tactographics. The drawings are precise. Special paper is needed, but the process of producing a physical tactographic from the digital drawing is quick. The finished product can be used by students who are either blind or visually impaired because the toner from the printer is there, as well as the raised lines and textures. After completing a drawing, you'll print it on microcapsule paper, either on a printer, and the printer has to have carbon in the ink or toner, just a word of caution there, or you can use a copier. If you'll be using a copier, start with a sheet of regular Braille paper. I like to put an X in the upper right corner to mark the above side of the microcapsule paper. So microcapsule paper has two sides. I don't know if you can see it, but there's a buff side, and the other side is very smooth and white. So on the side that we want to print on is this sort of buff colored, it's a little rougher. That's the side we want the tactographic to go on, but it's going to be printed or copied. So there's going to be a margin around the outer edge where it's not going to print or copy. We'll mark that in the Inkscape later. But before we put that microcapsule paper in the copier, we want to make sure that it's going to go through the rollers inside the copier the right way. Because if you put it in the wrong way, the buff side will react to the carbon in the toner and really mess up that nice expensive copier. So you don't want to do that right away. First, you want to make sure that you have a regular piece of Braille paper. I like to put an X in the upper right corner and then run it through the copier, put something on the glass and just copy something and make sure that's going to end up on this side of the paper, right side up, all the way the way you want it before putting in that special microcapsule paper through your nice copier. So with that said, let's open up Inkscape. You can download it from inkscape.org. And wherever you put the icon for Inkscape, open that up. So I'm going to open up mine. And I've opened up Inkscape for the first time. And what I get is this sort of dialog box, kind of orangish on top and kind of white on the bottom. You want to have the time to draw tab at the top selected. And on the left, you want existing files selected. The other things can be ignored. Right now, there are no existing files because we haven't started anything yet. So we're going to go down to the lower right and click the New Document button. And here we have the Inkscape screen for the first time. By the way, my apologies for my pointer arrow. On my end, it's bacon purple, but I understand that Zoom makes it small again, and there doesn't seem to be anything I can do about that. I'll try to be careful and direct you to where my mouse is pointing. So let's just take a quick tour of the Inkscape screen to begin with. At the top, going horizontally, we have a familiar menu bar. The names are a little different because it's Inkscape, but we're familiar with File and Edit. View, Layer, and Object are also common tabs that we're going to be using. Path we might possibly use as we get much more experienced with Inkscape, but we're not going to talk about that during these webinars. Text we'll use a little bit. Filters and extensions can be ignored, and you may possibly find some help in the Help menu. So that's the menu bar. Directly below that is the Tools Commands bar. This will change depending on which tool we use. I'll explain what tools are in later on. But for this bar changes all the time, and so you want to be sure to take a look at that, because you might find some options up there that you really want to make use of. I myself keep forgetting to look up there, but when I do, I sometimes find something that I had wished that there existed, and there it is right there on the Tools Command bar. Below the Tools Command bar is a horizontal ruler. Right now it's set to millimeters, so it looks a little odd. We'll change that in a moment. On the left then, going vertically, are all these little icons. That is the tools bar that I was just talking about. When we click one of these tools, a tool is a function of the mouse. When we click one of these tools, that tools command bar across the top is going to change. We'll get into the tools bar later on. Down at the bottom, we have a color bar. It has all these different colors, most of which we're going to ignore because Tattographics have to do usually with just black, gray, and white, and possibly no fill. So what we're really concerned about with the color bar down below is the X at the far left, black, one of the gray fills. My favorite is 40% gray, but you can try other grays with your equipment and your student to see what happens and what your student likes. And white, you might use. Some of these, they're called flat colors. They're just bright, solid colors. You might use these in order to make your tattographic, but then change it back to black so that it shows up on your tattographic. A color is not going to produce a height difference in a tattographic on microcapsule paper. So you can use it for yourself as you're making the tattographic, but then you're going to switch back to black, gray, white, or no fill. Below the color bar is the status bar. I find I forget it's even there, but you might find a use for it. So I'm going to leave it up because that's the default, is to have it present. On the right then, there are two vertical columns of icons. The one on the left is basically your menu bar all over again, but in icon form. So here is where you have get a new document, print, save, open, those sorts of commands. You may like to have it vertical instead of having a menu bar on top, and that's fine. So I'm going to leave it there for now, so for your reference, but I tend again to completely forget it's even there. The right vertical column then on the far right of the screen is called the snap bar. I'll explain snapping later on, but this again I tend to ignore, and in fact I want snapping turned off. I'll explain why later. So now let's go, that's gone all over the edges. Now let's talk about the middle, this big white area here. It looks like it's divided into 3 panels, but really, if I zoom out a bit by pressing my minus key or hyphen key on my keyboard, zoom in, there it goes. It's a little slow. But you can see now that we have a big white area all around. That is our canvas. It's kind of like a work table in physical terms. So that's our canvas. In the middle is our sheet of paper, and that is our workspace. So the canvas is all around, and then the workspace. So it's like a work table with a sheet of paper on it. Now I'm going to zoom back in by pressing my plus key on my keyboard. I hope it works. There we go. So that's what we have to work with. So the first thing when I'm working with software of this kind, by the way, I have a handout associated with these videos, and you should see it posted online, right, with the video. And in the handout, at the beginning, I explained that there are 3 main software programs that I'm aware of. One is Adobe Illustrator. That's a commercial software and the one that I'm most familiar with. But then there's Corel Draw, which is also very popular with transcribers, and Inkscape, which is what we're looking at now. And Inkscape is a free open source program. All 3 of these programs, Adobe Illustrator, Corel Draw, and Inkscape, are vector graphics software programs. That means that the drawings stay crisp even when they are enlarged or shrunk. So you can see on page 1 in the handout that I have just a regular circle. And if I zoom in as a raster image, it's made up of little pixels, little bitty squares. So if I zoom in, it becomes really obvious that the squares become really obvious, and the circle has a rough outline. But if I use a vector image, that has a smooth outline, whether I zoom in, zoom out, actually make a larger circle, a smaller circle, whatever. The outline is always going to be smooth, and that's why I like these vector graphic software programs, as opposed to embossing with or creating graphics with an embosser that uses dots and therefore actually makes a rough edge. You can't detect it with your finger, but it just makes a nicer outline if you use digital means to make graphics. And on page 1 and page 2 of the handout, I also tell you about downloading the Swell Braille font, and there's a link there. I tell you about downloading the guidelines from the Braille Authority of North America, BANA, or said BANA for short. I'll give you a link there to download the guidelines for making tactographics. There are a whole bunch of them that you probably didn't know existed. It's meant for transcribers, to be sure, but you will find all kinds of guidelines for making just about any kind of tactographic you can imagine, whether it's a bar graph, a counting exercise for a young student, Cartesian graph for algebra, bar graphs, maps, almost anything. And so instead of trying to guess if something is going to work and be detectable for the fingers, you can go to the BANA guidelines. They've already done the research there for you, and they will tell you exactly how to make it. They'll tell you a label, for instance, a Braille label needs to be 1/8 inch from, at least 1/8 inch from the object that it's labeling. And so there are all sorts of very specific guidelines like that in that document. You absolutely must feel the finished puffed up tactographic with your fingers. You can't just look at it, because what looks okay to the eyes, we can detect a finer amount of detail with our eyes than we can with our fingers. So you have to feel it with your fingers to make sure that this is going to work as a tactile graphic for your student. With that, oh, and I also wanted to tell you this handout, I am going to be referring to my own handout because as soon as I learned something in Inkscape, which is new to me too, as soon as I learned it, I put it into this handout. So I consider the handout a living document. And if you discover anything about it, please let me know, and I may add it or change it in the handout. So for right now, when I'm using any of these vector programs, including Inkscape, the first thing I want to do is make a template. Most of my tactile graphics are on wide Braille paper, 11.5 by 11 inches. So that's the first thing I'm going to do, because right now what we have is a standard 8.5 by 11 inch piece of so-called paper to work with. So the first thing I want to do is change the dimensions of that workspace, that paper in the middle. So I'm going to go to File, up at the menu bar at top, the far upper left corner, and then down to Document Properties, almost down to the bottom of the drop-down menu. Document Properties, and then I'm going to get what's called a dialog in Inkscape on the right of our workspace here. So Document Properties itself has a number of subtabs, most of which we can ignore. For right now, let's just focus on the first one, the page. As I mentioned before, the display units of those rulers are in millimeters right now. Let's click on the drop-down menu and change it to inches. The page size, we can ignore all of these preset page sizes because they are set according to standard print paper sizes, and none of those apply to Braille. So let's go down to orientation just below. It's easy to miss, like I almost just did. Orientation at the bottom of the page size window, we want to make sure that it is portrait, and it is portrait right now. So make sure it doesn't jump to landscape. Down below the word landscape is another opportunity to change the units. This is for the units of the workspace now, not the rulers. So let's click on that drop-down menu and change this one to inches as well. Then we can change, I'm highlighting and clicking and dragging on the numbers in that width window. Our Braille paper is 11.5, 11.5 inches wide. The height is 11.0. The rest of this, the scale, the background border, all display, all of that can be ignored. So now we have our paper set for width and height. So I'm going to click enter now, and it adds a bunch of zeros, but it still is 11.5 inches wide and 11.0 high. It's in inches. See, it jumped to landscape. So I want portrait, and now I can click enter again on my keyboard. And then I'm going to jump ahead a little bit and tell you a little bit about zooming. Right now, the dialog that is showing us these document properties is hiding the workspace that we just had. So to see all of the workspace, press 5 on your keyboard, and then we can see all of the workspace again. Okay, document properties is done. So the main document properties tab is a little bitty X just to the right of it. It's grayed out until you hover over it. I'm going to click that now to make all of that dialog go away. So now we have our paper the size we want. Let's go to our guidelines. Guides are going to show us our printable area on our workspace. Remember, I said when I was showing you the microcapsule paper that there's this kind of a border around the edges that a printer will not print onto. So we need to find out what that is. It's going to be different for everybody, but for me, my dimensions are in the handout. I put them on page 10, so that's what I'm referring to myself right now. To make guides, you click and drag on a ruler. So I click and drag on the horizontal ruler at the top, click and then drag. And as I do, a line appears. I'm going to click and drag and just put it somewhere approximately down at the bottom for now. Click and drag the horizontal ruler one more time and put it at the top somewhere. Then click and drag on the left ruler and go somewhere to the right of the paper. We're just approximating right now. Then click and drag for the left margin. Now I'm going to enter precise dimensions. So I'm going to go up to the top guide, hover over it until the pointer turns to a hand, double click, and here we have X and Y dimensions. We can leave the X alone for right now, but the Y is where it's going to be on the paper vertically. So the top for me is good at 0.7384. So the Y value is already highlighted. So all I need to do is type on my keyboard 0.7384. And then I'm going to click OK. The guideline jumped a little bit, so now it's where it needs to be exactly. I'm going to do the same thing at the bottom. Hover over it until it turns to a hand, double click. I'll move the dialog up a bit so we can see it. The Y value for this one is going to be 10.6904. And I think I can even press enter on my keyboard and start clicking OK. Either way is going to work. So now my top and bottom guidelines are exactly where I need to be. Let's do the same for the left and right ones now. Actually, I'm going to do the right one first. So hover over my right guide until the pointer turns to a hand, double click. Now we're working with X values, leaving the Y values alone. Now we want to know where to set the guideline precisely where we want it according to the horizontal space on the page. So for me, I want my right guide to be at 1.1239 and then press enter. No, that didn't work. Excuse me. Let's do that again. It's a little tricky to make it into a hand. Double click. X value. Yes, I got my numbers mixed up. I want my right value, my right guide set at 10.8158 and then enter. That's better. And then the left, one more time. Make it into a hand by hovering over it with your mouse. Double click. I'll move my screen a little bit. X value at, this is the one that's supposed to be 1.1239 and then enter. Now my guides are all set. I don't want these guides to move ever because, as I said, these are marking my printable space. The space inside these guides is where I can actually do my drawing. The boundary on the outside is off limits. So I don't want these guides to move ever. And there are at least 3 different ways to lock these guidelines so that they don't move. One is, as we are setting them, I kind of ignored it, but I'll go back to it by double clicking on a guide, any guide, move my box a little bit so we can see it. And in this little dialog box, there's a check box that you can check and say locked. As you create each guideline, you can do that if you want. I'm going to cancel for now. The second way that you can lock all the guidelines is where the rulers meet, the horizontal and the vertical at the upper left corner. There's a tiny little yellow padlock that will toggle the guides to be locked or unlocked. But it's really tiny and I can't see whether it's locked or not. There's no difference between a locked or unlocked padlock. So the third way that I like to do is go to Edit at the top menu And almost down to the bottom, there's an option for lock all guides. This will do them all at once, and so I like that as well. I'm going to click the box, and now my guides are locked. I never get a hand when I hover over a guide because it can't be moved. It can't be changed at this point. If you ever do want to change them, you'll have to go back and unlock them in one of those 3 ways. Okay, so now we have our paper the way we want, and we have our guides set. Now, making a template, I have to admit, is very nitpicky, and it uses a lot of functions ahead of time in Inkscape before we actually know what we're doing with them. But if you have a template set, then you can use this as a starting point from now on, and hopefully you never have to do this again. So bear with me as we continue on making this template, because you'll find it very helpful later on. I know I do. So the next thing we need to do now is to create some layers for this workspace, that piece of paper that we have. Layers are one of the shining points of all of these software programs. They're kind of like transparencies, where you can take a transparency out or add another one. And when you look through all of them, then you get the complete picture. So for instance, you could make a drawing of a map, say the 13 colonies, label them for a student to study, and then when it's quiz time or test time, you can take out that layer that has the Braille labels. You still have the map, and you still use the same file, and then run off your tactile graphic of the 13 colonies with that Braille label layer turned off. And then the student has space to label those 13 colonies for the quiz or test. So right now, what I like to have are 4 default layers. You may find that you like other layers, that's fine. But I'm just going to show you what I do so that you can have a starting point and go from there. So my 4 layers that I like to have are the a shadow dot layer, so I can line up my dots when I need them. I have a print layer for bringing in a print image so that I can trace it. I also have a Braille text layer so I can put those labels that I was just talking about onto there. And a 4th one that is escaping me right now, but we'll come to that. So first one is the shadow dot layer. I want to do that one first because, as I said, that one is the one that helps me lay out everything else. So let's do that. This is a little slow, but again, bear with me, and then it will be done hopefully forever. So the first thing we want to do is to create some layers. Let's go up to the menu bar up at the top, click on layer. And the first option is layers ... That's going to get us a layered dialog, just like we had a document properties dialog just before. So let's click on layers. And I'm going to hover over the left margin of it and click and drag just to make that a little wider so I can see it better. Okay, so right now we only have 1 layer, and it's called layer 1. To me, I would like to label this differently so it makes more sense to me, and it can be part of my 4 standard layers. So the first one is called layer 1. I'm going to click on it because it's highlighted in blue already. So I'm going to right click on it, and I want to rename the layer. And let's call this one the shadow dot layer, or just shadow dots. And then click on rename. There. Notice on the left of the shadow dots layer, there are 2 icons. One is a little padlock, and it works just like those padlocks for the guides, that it's either locked or unlocked. For right now, we want this shadow dot unlocked as it is so that we can work on this layer. To the left of that is a little eye icon. When the eye is open, the layer is visible. And when I click on it to close it, the layer becomes invisible. I'll show you what that means more so it makes more sense in just a bit. So now we have shadow dots. Now down to the lower, almost the lower left of the layers dialog box are plus and minus buttons. Let's click on the plus one to add a layer. Let's rename this one now, print page. This will be the layer that if we have an image to trace over later on, this is where we're going to put it and lock it so that we can trace over it without affecting any of our tactographic. Then we can take it away and there's no more print image, we just have what we drew. Let's click add for now. So now we have two layers. Click on the plus button again. Let's call this one Braille text. And I think I can press enter on my keyboard instead of clicking add. Yep, that worked. Our fourth layer is going to be the trace tactile itself, the layer that we're going to draw on. So let's name this one Trace Tactile. And this time I'm going to click on the button add just to show you that. So now I have my 4 default layers, but I want them in a certain order because they're like transparency. So whatever is on top is going to cover up what's on the bottom. So what I want is shadow dots at the top. And normally you can click on a layer and then drag it up to where or down where you want it to go. But the screen share for Zoom is not going to let me do that. So I'm going to show you another way to do it. The shadow dot layer, I'm going to right click on those words and I get a pop-up menu. There are 2 options, raise layer and lower layer. Lower layer is grayed out right now because it's already, the shadow dot layer is already at the bottom. So I want to raise the shadow dot layer. It's going to raise this, clicking will raise that layer by one layer, but I want it to the top. So I'm going to do it several times. Right click, raise layer, and now lower layers is an option now, but I still want to raise it one more time at the top. There we go. The traced tactile layer, then next I want Braille text, and then I want trace tactile. So I want those 2 middle ones flipped. So I will right click on Braille text and raise that layer. I could have right clicked on the trace tactile layer and lowered that one either way. It's fine. So now, and print page is already at the bottom. That's where I want it. So now I have the layers in the order that I want them. Shadow dots, Braille text, trace tactile, and print page. Let's go back up to the shadow dots. That's the one we're going to work with first. So click on shadow dots to highlight it there in blue. And now we're going to make a shadow dot layer, a full page of full cells. First though, in order to do that, click on, in the tools bar, that vertical column of icons, almost in the middle is a little capital A. Click on that, and now we can type some text. However, even before that, if you look up at the tools command bar, which as I said, changes with each little icon that we click on the tools bar. So now we have options to change the text because we have clicked the little capital A that is our text tool. We can see that right now the font, if we type anything, is going to be in Verdana. We don't want that. We want a Braille font. For microcapsule paper, we want the Swell Braille font. If you are going to use an embosser, you probably want the Braille 29 font. That comes with the Tiger Graphics suite. If you don't have a Tiger Graphic embosser, see if you can get that Braille 29 font. You can contact me and I'll do my best to help you out with that. But for right now, we have Verdana. We don't want that. Normal is okay. There's no such thing as italic Braille. So normal is okay, but it's only going to be 11 point size font. We want 24 point for Swell Braille. Leave it at 29. That's for Braille 29 font. That's why it's called Braille 29 font, because it's 29 points high. We want to change all of this. So let's click on our text menu at the up in the menu bar. Click on that, and then click on the first option, text and font. This is going to give us a dialog box on the right. Click. Now we have text and font tab, and we have some stuff going on here. For the font family, as I said, we want Swell Braille for microcapsule paper that we're going to use with a Fuser machine later on. A PF machine is what I use. PIAF, PF. PIAF stands for Pictures in a Flash. That's one brand. There's at least one other brand that I know of. That's the kind of machine we're going to use. And so, but when we do that, the Braille is going to puff up and the dots will blend together if we use just regular Braille font. So we want a Swell Braille font that's specially made for this procedure, so that when the dots puff out like cookies on a cookie sheet in the oven, they won't smash into each other. So for the font family, I don't know a quick way to get there. We'll have to just keep scrolling with the mouse until I get down to Swell Braille. I'm going to get there in a moment. Almost. Here we are. Nope, not Sim Braille, because that will show the shadow dots. We want Swell Braille, which will not show the shadow dots. Click on Swell Braille. The style we want to keep as normal. As I said, there's no such thing as italic Braille or bold Braille or anything like that. So keep it at normal. Slide your mouse down. That's where we find our font size. Right now it's at 18. So we don't want it at 11 like in our tools command bar. We don't want it 18 here like it is here. What we want is 24. So click on the drop down menu and find 24. Click on that. Down at the bottom, you see a sample of what it's going to look like. That is good. That's what we want. If we had any text to apply, we could apply it, but I haven't typed anything yet. I can set it as default, which is exactly what I want to do. So I'm going to click this button down at the lower left of this text and font dialog. Click. And now whenever I type something in the workspace, it's going to be this Swell Braille font at 24 point size. On the tools bar vertically in the middle is a little capital A. Press that, click on it. And this changes our pointer to a little capital A with a tiny little dot in the upper left corner. That tiny little dot is where our pointer actually is. The little A just tells us what kind of pointer we have right now. So right now, just click close to the upper left corner of the printable area to get our cursor where we want it. It's blinking right now. And then I'm going to press the equal sign on my keyboard 40 times to get a 40 cell line across, and then Shift Enter, not just Enter, but Shift Enter. So I get, wrap it around to 20 until I get 25 lines down. After I press Shift Enter the first time, hopefully it just nicely wraps around by itself, and you can just keep pressing the equal key on your keyboard until you get what you want. I already did it. So here we go, popping in the Swell Braille sheet. I have one more cell to go actually. So I am going to hopefully, yes, complete my shadow dot, but notice it's outside of the printable area right now. Oh, after you finish all your shadow dots, press Enter. There we go. But it's too big. It's outside our printable area. So we want 25 lines within the printable area, and that way it will be the Braille that comes out and on the puffy paper will be the line distance that is there for regular Braille. So we want to match the line distance. So right now I can click anywhere in the full sheet of shadow dots. And then in our tools command bar, there's a line distance. So right now it's set at lines. That's what we want. But the lines are too far apart. For Swell Braille and Inkscape and my equipment, 1.20 is what works. You may have to fiddle with it to make sure that to get your dots into the printable area the way you want it. But when I do 1.20, that works nicely. I can also change my cursor back to the selection area, the black arrow at the top, and click it. And I'm going to nudge it up just a bit because it's not quite inside there. That looks pretty good. One more time there. Okay, now I'm set. Also, with this shadow dot layer, right now all the dots are black. They're going to cover up whatever text we put in there later on. We don't want that. We just want it there to line it up. So changing our cursor back to the text box. You do have to change your cursor around a lot. I'll show you shortcuts in a later video. But for right now, Control A to select them all. 40% gray works well for me. You may like it slightly lighter or darker, whatever. Works for you is fine. Just you want it gray, but not black. You don't want to cover up the text that you'll be adding later. So I will click on this 40% gray on the color bar down at the bottom. Click. And now I have gray shadow dots. That is perfect. That's what I want. Okay, so going back to our layers tab over on the right dialog. Remember, we have 4 layers here, and we can lock each of these and make them invisible. And that's what I want to do with the shadow dot layer right now. I want to lock it so it doesn't move when I put something else on top of it. Click, and now it's locked. It won't move. I can't select it even when I put my I'm clicking around and nothing is happening because it's locked. That's what I want. I also don't want to see the shadow dots right now, so I am going to click the little eye icon to the left of the padlock. Click. The eye closes and the shadow dots go away. They're still there. I'll click on the eye icon again to make them visible. So if I want to see them, they're there. But if I don't want to see them, like right now, I click on the eye icon and close it. So now my shadow dot layer is invisible. We'll move on to the rest of the tools bar in a later video. I'm going to stop there. I hope to see you next time for video 2. Thank you.